All right, we have a wonderful turnout today for our first ever Koha Community Gifted webinar series. My name is Jessie Zarrow, and I am with Kelly McElligott and Eric from the California College of Arts. And we are going to be talking to you today about SQL reports. Before we hand it over to Eric, Kelly and I will both be monitoring the chat and Q&A during the presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. We do have some time at the end scheduled, so after Eric is done presenting, we will have time for Q&A to answer any questions that we have. Thank you again, Eric, for being our inaugural presenter for the Koha Community Gifted Series. This really means a lot to us. As you all know, Koha is a gift, and this is Eric's gift back to the community. And with that, we'll pass it over to Eric.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me too. It's very flattering. Let me get my screen sharing going. Okay. And just one more step. All right, so I'm going to be talking about SQL reports in Koha today. I'm Eric Phetteplace. I'm the systems librarian at California College of the Arts, and we've been on Koha since 2016, supported by Bywater Solutions. I am going to talk specifically about SQL reports in the context of Koha, so it's not going to be like a general lesson on how to write SQL. There will be some SQL on slides, not super advanced, but maybe some techniques that people don't use very commonly. So hopefully understandable. But if you do have questions, feel free to post them in chat or the Q&A tool. And I'm really not like an expert on SQL by any means. So maybe other people will have better ideas, different approaches to solving the same problems. And I hope there's time at the end where we can discuss those things and I can get to some of the questions. So I'll start off at the most obvious place on just learning about the database structure and what's in a table and how to structure your reports. So the two most obvious places to look are also the ones that are conveniently linked in the Koha reports module on the staff side. So it's the reports library, which has example reports written by other people, just hundreds of them, as well as the schema that shows the structure of the database. The library is really great because no matter how specific your needs are, there's a good chance that somebody else has had something similar, and you can build 90% of your reports starting from somebody else's work. And then the schema is useful in that it shows what fields are on particular database tables and what data types those fields are. So whether it's an integer or some kind of text field or a timestamp, and that gives you a good idea of how to structure your queries. The first kind of trick that I have here is that I actually use a browser search engine to link to, it's a sort of like dynamic bookmark for the schema. So the way that browser search engines in Chrome and Firefox and others work is you give them a search engine URL and you can replace the query with a placeholder like %s in this example. And you can type in any query and that just gets swapped out in the URL. It doesn't have to be a search engine per se. So with a search engine setup like this, I can search specifically the 23.05 version of the schema and just type in a table name and go directly to it. So just to make that concrete, SQ is my shortcut, and then I type in the name of a table like items, and I'm just taken directly to it. So when you're looking up particular tables a lot, it's just a lot quicker to go directly to them rather than need to go to the schema and then do an extra click. So I also use a lot of very simple queries to look at the database structure and what's in it. So the kind of the simplest query of all, select star from table name that just shows you all of the fields. And this is in a way more useful than the schema because it shows you the actual values and data in your database as opposed to this kind of abstract outline that can be relatively hard to understand. And then you can kind of enhance this query a little bit by enumerating the values in a particular field. So you're not sure what values this field takes on. You can select distinct and then the field name. So here I type, which is item type on the items table. And that'll show you all the different item types in your Koha instance. And then to enhance that even a little bit more, you could add a count to it. So select distinct field name and then count star, and that'll allow you to look at the number of times each value appears in your database, which gives you a good way to test your assumptions about your data and think about structuring your queries before you even get into writing them. What I do with these really simple queries is I just have this one report called Eric's Never-Ending Query, and I run it over and over and over again so that our reports library isn't filled up with these very, very simple reports that are easier to just type out by hand than to go and find if I had a list of hundreds of them. So that's my approach to executing these. One of the first peculiarities you probably run into when writing Koha reports is how it handles deleted data. I think intuitively you might assume when you delete something like a bibliographic record, it just gets removed from the database. But for a lot of reasons, that's a bad idea because it's not reversible. You can't have any kind of undo feature if you do things like that. And it can lead to inaccuracies in reporting, which I'll cover in a little bit, actually. But Koha does things differently. It actually copies the data to a different table with a deleted prefix. And it does this for several different data types: biblio, metadata, items, borrowers, aka patrons, which is what we call them. And then similar things happen with current checked out items and holds, as opposed to historical ones that have already been returned or fulfilled. Those are moved to a table prefixed by old. So issues is like your current checkouts, as opposed to old issues is ones that happened in the past and were turned. And if you don't factor these into a lot of different types of reports, you're going to end up with inaccuracies. Any report that kind of looks at not just the current exact state of your Koha, but its history, its changes over time, will be inaccurate if you don't factor in these tables. So how do you deal with these? What's the approach? There's a really handy operator in SQL, union, that allows you to combine two select statements that share the same shape. And that means they have like the same number of fields, and those fields have the same types of data. Well, the biblio and deleted biblio and all these deleted tables, they share the exact same structure, right? You can verify this in the schema. They're all the same fields and the same number. So they work perfectly with union. And what you do is you put your union of your two tables into a subquery. So that's wrapped in parentheses. And then you can treat that subquery as if it was a table, essentially. So this is kind of constructing an all biblios table from those two biblio deleted biblio tables. And then with that, we could do select whatever we want from our all biblios, join to another table, or use a where criteria to filter the data. A thing you might want to do is to union your two tables, but also remember where each row came from, whether it was coming from the deleted or the live table. So how I handle this is I sort of annotate the tables by adding a column to them in the subquery. So here you'll see that for my items, the rows that come from that table, I've added a status column with a value of live. But for the rows coming from the deleted items table, I've made that status to deleted. And because I've done this to both select statements, the shape of the queries is the same, so the union statement works. And then I have that information later on, should I choose to do like a where condition or something else in my data, so I can see actually which row they came from. A concrete example of why factoring in the deleted tables matters would be something like counting the annual bibliographic records that you've added to your catalog. So this is a report that we use that shows our biblios created in each month of each year since 2016 when we got Koha. So without the union to the deleted biblio table, this would undercount the number of bibs that we added, because any title that was added post 2016 but then subsequently deleted would be missing from this query, because those are in that deleted biblio table. So we need that in there to factor in actually all of the biblios we're creating, right? And this is exactly the sort of port where it's looking at that sort of historical change over time that needs to think about not just your exact current state, but the historical state of Koha in the past. Intuitively, when we build a circulation report, you might think of the issues table that holds your checkouts and old issues, but the issues table itself doesn't record information, item information, like item type, location, or branch. So you would have to join it to the items table to get that information. But the items table shows the current state of an item, not the state at the time the checkout occurred, which is really what you would be interested in circulation statistics. So if this is a little bit hard to understand, here's a example that happens with our library a lot. A faculty member will place something on reserve from our main collection. So how we implement that is we change the item type of the record to be 2-day reserve as opposed to like book or something that's out on the main shelves. Then lots of students check it out. It's on reserve. The circulation rules are different because of that item type, and it can only be held a couple days. At the end of the semester, it goes back to its previous state. We put it back out on the main shelves. It has an item type of book. These would all be recorded in the statistics table with that item type of 2-day reserve. But if you ran a report using issues, it would be book, which is not the same type as it was when checked out. So statistics is useful because it records certain item information like type, shelving location, branch, collection code, and the patron category as well at the time of the checkout. So if your patrons are changing categories, for instance, too, and you want to do research on how often different patron categories use the library, you need to use the statistics table, otherwise you introduce inaccuracies. Here's a very sweet and simple example of this written by Nicole C. Engard of Bywater that does the checkouts by branch over time. So this looks at each month, how many checkouts were there in each branch. Now, California College of the Arts, we closed down a branch recently. This shows accurately over history how many checkouts were at that branch. If we didn't do it from the statistics table and we used issues and old issues union together, that branch would just disappear from our data as if it had never existed. And the branches that its items move to would inappropriately take credit for that circulation data, right? But because we're using statistics, it's recorded properly. Another common challenge you run into with Koha reports is getting authorized values to look like something meaningful. So authorized values are a sort of controlled vocabulary in Koha. They're used by lots of different features, but item types and locations and various sorts of statuses related to items are all common ones. And the report that I did with the I types earlier, for instance, you're seeing the code book. And we have codes in there that are not very obvious, like lib use book and new per for new periodicals and library use books. So we'd much prefer to show like a human readable informative code rather than something like -1 that nobody knows what it actually means. So you can do this by connecting to the authorized values table. That's just a table in the Koha database like anything else. And there's a couple kind of caveats to doing so. First of all is that there isn't just one description. There's actually 2 fields in authorized values. There's lib and lib_opac. And what those are described as in the admin module is description and description opac. So it's like staff versus public facing description, basically. So you could use either of those in your report is the important thing to keep in mind. And either of them could be empty. You don't have to put in those descriptions. So you might want to be careful and utilize something like an if null or a case statement in your query to swap out the empty values. I'm not showing that here because I think it's a little bit too much. But also it means that when you group things into particular authorized value codes, if you're doing that, you want to group by the code itself and not one of its descriptions, because otherwise all your empty descriptions get combined together, and that's inaccurate. The second thing to keep in mind when using the authorized values table is in the join statement here. You can see it's join authorized values on I.not-for-loan equals the authorized value. So that's joining the actual code, like -1 means on order, for instance. But as well as the category and authorized value category equals not for loan, because the value -1 means different things in different authorized value categories. It might mean, long overdue in the item lost, in the lost value category, but it might mean on order for not for loan. So I mentioned this just because I think joining on multiple conditions is not something that comes up very frequently in SQL, but when it does come up, it's really important. Otherwise, things will be done improperly. So that's what it would look like to translate a not for loan code into something that actually is meaningful. A cool feature of Koha reports is how easy it is to get their data processed by an external application. You can simply set the report to public and then copy its JSON URL. And then this could be consumed by any kind of script or website that needs that data. It basically just has a simple URL template, and then you change the ID of the report to the one that you want to use. Of course, public does mean public. Anyone could go and find your report URL and look at this. So you really don't want to include confidential information, but lots of your Koha data is public already. Like your bibliographic records can be downloaded from the OPAC, and aggregated information in a report that does summaries of circulation by patron category. That's going to be sufficiently confidential to be made public. So you could easily envision building like a library dashboard using this feature, right? You're pulling from several different reports and you're showing how many checked out items do we have currently? How many registered patrons? Here are our most recent acquisitions. All of that really easily to put together using this public report JSON data. Here's a kind of contrived example of something you could do with it, where I am taking the mark 948 tag from a single record. I haven't talked about runtime parameters in reports, but they're very useful. That's what the double angle brackets around biblio number here is here. Every time the report runs, you can put in a different biblio number, so you get that specific bib's metadata back. And then that can be provided to the JSON report URL in a SQL params parameter, where you can still just send a number to it and it'll return it back for you. So you have that very simple report that pulls for different bibs. And then you could add something into your OPAC user.js, where on each bib detail page, it goes and grabs the biblio number from the URL. It passes it along to that report. If you get data back, then you append it to the record display. And that allows you to add fields like 948 that aren't in the default display templates to your record pretty easily. Now, the typical way to do this is like editing the XSLT templates, and that there are other ways to do it that are probably more like official, but this is a really like quick and dirty way to accomplish that. And the one thing I would say about using the JSON report URLs that's good to keep in mind is they return an array of arrays. So basically you get a big parent array, and then everything in that is a row for each of your results in the report, for each row in the report. So that's in the code here, which is relatively difficult to read. I realize it goes data bracket 0 bracket 0. I'm accessing the first entry of the first child array to get to that. Yeah, so those are all my tips and tricks basically, but I did want to just take some time to appreciate all the excellent work that's going into reports. It's really great to see something that's just continually getting better with every release. It's really noticeable. So many quality of life improvements. If you're using them, even just once a week or every day, you're really noticing it. So maybe one of the best ones is that if you include like an identifier column, like biblio number or borrower number, you can directly connect that to bulk operations in the admin side now. So you can take a report about items and just do a bulk item modification. It's so convenient and handy. May seem like a small one, but they added an update and run button so you can just change a report and run it right away. I use this all the time because when you're refining a report, you're doing lots of small changes and seeing what happens, right? So it really saves a lot of time. It seems simple, but it's very, very handy. For that never-ending query I talked about, I run that thing very frequently. So just being able to edit quickly, run, wonderful. Very recently, we got auto completion in the reports editor, which can really help you with fields that you don't know the name of, or just typing out things quicker than you would otherwise. Some of these field names are quite long. That's a really handy and really fancy feature. And then also on the super fancy side is the ability to just make a graph right out of a report's results. If you have numeric data, you can turn it into a pie chart or a time series chart really easily. And so those are all excellent features, and they just keep showing up with every release, and it's a great time to be writing reports in Koha for sure. I wanted to shout out the reports channel in the Bywater Partners Slack. I'm not like a SQL expert, like I said, but there are definitely some true wizards in there that know how to do very fancy things. So it's a great place to ask questions or even just post examples of your reports that you're proud of or think are pretty cool. Really, really great organization. A pretty comical example that I enjoyed recently was Koha censors a lot of SQL keywords. It just won't let you put them anywhere in your report, even if it's in a comment. Won't let you do things like update, delete, drop, which is good with good reason. That's like a security concern, right? They're trying to protect against sort of like SQL injection attacks. But if you're trying to like search for a title that has one of the words in it, you can't do that. And people came up with a really creative and funny solution, I thought, which is just you use concat to get the string without having the letters in that exact order, right? So Rocky Horror Picture and then you can search for it. So I thought that was a creative solution from people. And I did want to mention that the main Koha community Slack also has a reports channel too. So even if you're not with Bywater, you can definitely get some reports assistance and talk to like-minded folks. So yeah, that was my presentation. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for coming. I was very fun to put together this talk and think about all the different little quirks of Koha and tricks that I have. Here's all my contact information around the web. I'm like Phet23 generally is my handle on a lot of things. I'll paste the link to the slides again in case people came in late and missed it at the beginning. And I'm happy to take a little time to answer questions. So I will go ahead and stop sharing.
Eric, well, thank you so much, Eric. This was amazing. I'll just tell you one comment that came in the chat is you are dropping knowledge bombs, Eric. This is amazing. So
wonderful.
You are truly making a lot of people happy. So thank you so much. We did get a question that we thought you just could answer live. Can you join multiple authorized values in an SQL report? For example, if you wanted to show the not for loan value as well as the lost.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it actually comes right back to that note I made about multiple conditions in the join allows you to do that. So what your join would look like is you can join to a table multiple times in a query. So you would join to authorized value once, and your on condition would look like connect the code to whatever the field is on the items or other non-AV table that you're looking at. And then on category, not underscore loss. So that's your loss. Then you would do another join to the table again that looks pretty much the same, except it connects to a different value on your target table and then uses a different category. So you would say AV.category equals lost, for instance, if you were looking at my example there. So yeah, you can translate multiple authorized value codes. And then there's lots of good examples to working around all of these problems in the reports library, because everyone kind of writing reports has to deal with them. But there are some good ones that show what I meant when I mentioned like using a case statement where you maybe don't care for your descriptions as much, and you just want to, I just want to write in my report, if it's -1, here's the text you show. If it's 0, here's the text you show, etc. And you can kind of just write out your own translation instead of doing a join. And there are merits to both approaches. So sometimes that's better. Sometimes it's more work, and it makes the report quite a bit longer. Yeah, cool question. Well, I'm happy. I'm in both of the Slack channels I mentioned too. So if people have questions about the presentation or anything, you can ask them to me, or you can write in the reports channel. But yeah,
I do agree. The report channel in the Slack is probably the most active and the most largest wealth of knowledge that you could ever run across, really. So we appreciate all that you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Eric. For those who may have come in the middle, this was recorded, so we'll be sharing a link to the recording so you can come back and watch. Eric, thank you again for being our inaugural presenter for Koha Community Gifted. We're really excited about all the next series that are coming up, and have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the community.